May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Simon Yisrayl, Deacon Yasher, and I'd like to serve you as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding a seat for Sabbath service. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services. It's now a privilege and an honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl Abel now entering the sanctuary. And now I turn to Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. My speech to God be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. The title of my speech is Satan Tempted Yeshua. There are many examples in the Holy Scriptures of Satan tempted, but I would like to focus on the examples of Yeshua. Please turn to Yahweh 1, 12, and 13, found on page 760. And immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness, and he was there in the wilderness for 40 days tempted by Satan, and was with the wild beast, and the Malachim ministered to him. In the fourth book of Yisrayl, chapter 13, verse 69, it says, Yeshua was a man who was tempted like we are. He was a weak human being just like we are. The fact he had already developed a great connection with Yahweh by the time he went to see Yachanan, and he started his ministry. He had the overcoming power to resist unclean food, or resist a glass of water, to fast, or things like this. He could resist sin and the temptation to sin. He learned some more by his sufferings, as the scriptures show us. Yeshua did not disobey. Yeshua did not give him to temptation. Satan tries to tempt us into disobeying Father Yahweh. Please turn to Yaakov 4:7, found on page 955. Therefore, submit yourselves to Yahweh, resist the devil, and she will flee from you. In the fourth book of Yisrayl, chapter 11, verse 73, it says, think about these things before you are ever tempted, which are your desires. Do you want to be like Satan? Surely not. Surely there is no other one here who wants to be like her. Then you need to set your mind ahead of time. Read the laws and say, I am going to do when this pops in front of me. Make up your mind ahead of time. After Satan saw that Yeshua cannot be tempted, she left. Please turn to Luke 4:13, found on page 785. So when the devil had excused every temptation, she departed from him for a season. In the fourth book of Yisrayl, chapter 8, verse 37, we are now being led and perfected by the same faith that perfected Yeshua. Yeshua was perfect. Yeshua was tempted in all points like we are, but he remained perfect. Think of that. He was tempted in all these points, but he was perfect. He was perfected by the faith, perfected by this faith that you are now following. It is also perfecting you. Look how far you have come, brethren, and think about it for a minute. Do not stop there. Let's go on to perfection as the scriptures say. May God bless your understanding. I'd like to turn up Sunday word for prayer.
Now we're going to hear from our first speaker, son of Yisrayl Abel, the great deacon Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. And be turning over in your scriptures to Proverbs chapter 4. And today we're going to be discussing basing every thought and action that we make on Yahweh's laws. And how to do that and why it's so important to do that. It's really our duty. It's the whole reason that we're here is to learn to base our thoughts and decisions on Yahweh's laws. Now, it's really easy if you're not careful, and I want everybody to listen to this and to hear this, to understand this, not just hear this. It's really easy if you're not careful to get into a mode where you allow Yahweh's laws to just become ceremony. And when I say ceremony, I mean it's kind of like, okay, this is just what we do. We just, I'm just here I come to confessions every week. I salt my food, but you kind of lose the significance in your mind of Yahweh's laws, and it just becomes something that you just do. And it's great to do them, but the danger in that is when you start to lose the significance and the importance in your mind, you give room for Satan to get in and start putting silly questions in your mind of, well, why am I really here? This isn't important to me anymore. And that's where we can start to fall short and make silly mistakes that we wouldn't make before. So we have to keep that significance. And really when we get into that slump, it's no different than going to a Christian church. That's the same thing that they do. They, for the entire week, they act frivolous and party and play, but on Sunday morning they put on their holy face, and they go to church and they, try to act in what they know as, trying to be a servant to their being that they worship, their gods. And then after church they go right back to acting silly again. So we can't get into that position. So we can get out of that slump by thinking on, why am I actually here in the house of Yahweh? Why did I come here in the first place? Why do I keep the laws of Yahweh? Why do we do what we do here in the house of Yahweh? And try to steer away from answers like, I keep the laws of Yahweh because if I don't, I'm going to burn in hell. Or I keep the laws of Yahweh because they told me that I could live forever, so I signed up. They're really surface answers, and we can go a lot deeper than that. And we should do our best to go a lot deeper than that. If that's, praise Yahweh, if that's what's keeping you here, by all means, hold on to that, but build on that and realize why we're actually here. So, why should we keep the laws of Yahweh? Why do we keep the laws of Yahweh? We should keep the laws of Yahweh because they're the only substance in the entire universe that has been created, molded, formed, proven by Yahweh himself to wipe away any pain and suffering that can ever take place. Praise Yahweh. They've been proven without fail to bring peace and joy to the entire universe. They ensure that your body remains healthy, that the environment, the earth, the universe remains healthy, and they remove any tension, any disagreement, any strife, any problems that may come up. That's why we keep the laws of Yahweh. Because without fail, they do that. Praise Yahweh. And why do we come to the house of Yahweh? Well, the house of Yahweh is the only place in the world that teaches those laws, that will make that change to the entire universe. And sure, maybe we slip up, people slip up, and you can't look at that and say, well, this can't be the house of Yahweh. No, Yahweh called the worst people and put them in together in this bunch and said, now overcome. So we're going to make mistakes, but you have to remember we're the only place in the world where everybody is trying their best to keep all of those laws. Praise Yahweh. Now, on top of all that, we have an entire book, the book of Yahweh, that's full of prophecies pointing to this house of Yahweh being the last day's work, where Yahweh said, I'm going to establish my laws here. And that's where you need to go. So those chunks of information there, if you really realize them, meaning making them real in your mind's eye, you realize them and you allow them to sink into your mind, that in itself will give you a motivation and a drive unlike anything else to keep you here, to keep you strong in the house of Yahweh. And it'll give you a desire to stay here and to push forward and to keep going. And if you make a mistake, that in itself, knowing those laws will change your life, will give you the motivation to get right back up immediately and keep going. So that's what we need to do. It'll make it to where you want to make Yahweh's work such a part of you to where you can't live without it. So by doing that, by putting that in your mind, you give yourself a purpose, a reason for being here, and the laws of Yahweh cease to be this ceremony. They turn into your actual life force, the driving force that keeps you here. And that's where we need to be. That's, loving Yahweh's laws instead of just doing them just because they said we should do them. So that's what we need to do. We need to really get to where we love the laws of Yahweh. Now, Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4 here. And let's start in verse 19. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. So they're living this lifestyle like I described earlier. They just do what they do. They try to maybe have some semblance of what they think might be righteousness, but they don't know what righteousness is. And they're dying like flies. So, my son, pay attention to my laws and incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them in the center of your heart. Now, that center of your heart there is more than just a beautiful phrase. Your heart, your mind, is the seat of your intelligence. So that means that the laws of Yahweh have to be the foundation of everything that you do. It has to be something that you base all of your decisions, all of your actions upon. The center of your heart. And I don't know if you remember, back in the X-rated sermons even, Pastor brought out about he was talking about the abundance of your heart. From the abundance of your heart, the mouth speaks. And how every single thing that you do puts a layer of choice down in your heart. And that's what it's talking about there. Make them the center of your heart. Meaning, put down these layers of righteousness in your heart to where everything you do bounces off of that and becomes a right choice. They mean life to those who find them and health to their whole body. Now, verse 23, I love this scripture a lot. It says, guard your mind with all diligence. How do you guard your mind? The same thing. You base your thoughts and decisions on Yahweh's laws. For out of it flows the springs of life. Now, that just sounds wonderful, doesn't it? The springs of life. What are the springs of life? That's a really interesting thing there. So, that word springs, it's a Hebrew word 8444. And it means outgoings, it means boundaries, it means borders. It means exit. Now, what does that have to do with anything? If you remember, Pastor talked about the amazing human potential. He said, your mind has the ability to do anything. Anything you can imagine. Your mind has no limit. The only limit that your mind has is the limit that you put on it. If we, I'm a part of it too for sure. If we choose not to make Yahweh's laws the foundation of our mind, that's where we're putting that limit. So our mind can be a wellspring. It can be a wealth of knowledge. We can learn so many things. And if we guard our mind with all diligence, we'll have that endless supply of knowledge. We will be able to learn that and do things we could not imagine before. That's what that springs of life is. All right, so you only get out what you put in. You reap what you sow in your mind. But that obedience to Yahweh leads to understanding. We hear first comes obedience, then comes understanding. But how do you get the understanding? The understanding comes through the obedience. You obey, and then you begin to understand. You experience the benefits that come from the laws. And you begin to see, okay, that's why I need to keep that law. And the desire to sin becomes, you overcome the desire to sin because you don't want to hurt yourself anymore. And you realize how you can help yourself. So that desire to sin leaves. It's really that simple. So when that negative thought comes into your mind and you have that foundation of Yahweh's laws, you can simply say, excuse me, I've made the choice to follow Yahweh's law. And by doing that, praise Yahweh, by doing that, you're not smashing the negative thought or fighting it or telling it, get out of here or anything like that. You're simply telling it, no, I have no room for you. There's no place found in my mind for you. And you refuse sin. Praise Yahweh. That's just the same thing Yeshua did when he was tempted. In Matthew 4, he said, excuse me, but Yahweh, my Father, I will serve, and, him I will reverence, and the devil fled. There was no place in his mind found for her. So through that obedience will come the understanding. Now, there's some things that we've allowed to enter our mind from Christianity and things in the world that seem right. They seem like we should do them. So, I remember one situation where there was some rocks. And somebody moved these rocks. And I was actually talking to a brother about this week. And pastor was, no, put those rocks back. Those are Yahweh's rocks. Now, the average person would be like, what in the world are you worried about some stupid rocks for? But pastor wasn't worried about the rocks. He was worried about keeping the law, making sure that we don't remove rocks that belong to Yahweh and are set aside for Yahweh's purpose. Okay, there's so many other things. When we do things, we might think they're okay. But if you have even any, might this be wrong? Ask your counselors. Because they're focused on Yahweh and they can help you to be focused on Yahweh as well. There's things that the world does. For instance, or we might even fall short in the House of Yahweh here when, like dealing with worldly family members and trying to be, to tie ourselves back with them. That seems like, a great thing to do. You want to keep in touch with your family. We're family, we're close. But look at the danger that you're doing, not only to yourself, but also to them. They will have an opportunity sooner or later. But if you make them feel like, it's okay, what you're doing is okay, then notice what you're doing. You want King David. I'll just put it this way. I'm going to quote King David here in Psalm 69. He said, let their table become a snare. Let the curses of Yahweh come upon them. Now that might seem harsh, but if they didn't learn their lesson, when they had an opportunity, they would think, I sinned all my life and I'm just fine. No, they need to realize that no, curses come from sin. So when they have an opportunity, they'll turn from it. That's what you want. But you have to do it the right way. The same thing like giving gifts to somebody who may seem poor and you think they need help and you just want to give them a handout. That can be more harmful than beneficial. And that's why pastor says don't do it, because they actually need to learn to support themselves. That's why he says go to the South Office and tell them so they can actually give them something to support themselves instead of doing what seems right in your own mind. So we have to remember that the way pastor does things, he's not trying to be difficult. And when you work with pastor, he can be a really, really enjoyable person to work with if your mind is in the right place. And the reason I say that is because some people would think he's a difficult person, but he's not. He's thinking about the laws of Yahweh. And when you realize that, praise Yahweh. When you realize that, you begin to think about the laws of Yahweh and you want what he wants. And then we're both working on the same team. So do your best to do that. Don't let Yahweh's laws just become mindless words to you. actually do them because you've learned to love them, and strive, do your best to keep all of your thoughts, all your decisions based upon Yahweh's laws. And you'll grow and you'll flourish and you'll become some of the greatest teachers in the entire universe. So praise Yahweh. If you'll all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the next teacher, the great Kahan Benjamin Krause Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. Does anybody know what today is? I don't think anybody knows what today is. I don't even know if it's the first of Abraham yet. But I do know it's 7:14, so that's another 777, right? We're going to continue on this theme. You know, last week, Pastor talked about this race that he had with Yeshurun and Bill. It takes two of them to make one of him. Notice that? It took two of him to beat Pastor. I don't know if they beat him or not, but now that I got their attention, praise Yahweh. Can I have my next slide? We're going to be talking about that tag number again. You know, it's this never-ending well of information, so get ready. And before we go any further, I want to play a video, because I don't know that a lot of people here remember, but the great Kahan Yisrayl Hawkins gave a sermon about the white stone back in 2010, and he's the one that actually initially told us about this dream that Pastor had about the white stone. So can we play the video, please?
In his dream, he saw a white stone, and the stone was bent like a finger would be bent at the knuckle. So it had a bottom part and then it went up like that at an angle. Now on that stone, there were 3 numbers written. From top to bottom, it was the number 17, the number 28, and the number 74. And then Pastor woke up, and with the thought in his mind that this is my lot. Now this dream that Pastor had, this took place back in March of 2009. March of 2009. March of 2009. Now this, if you remember your history here, and it wasn't so long ago, this was at the height of all the stress and persecution that was taking place.
Okay. Can I have my next slide? In that sermon, that was 10:1:10, Pastor also spoke about the chief cornerstone. Okay? And that's interesting because if you remember, the gematria for the cornerstone, if I can have my next slide, is 1074. Okay, now, can we go back 3 slides? We're talking today about the perfect number. The perfect number. Right there, 1074, the perfect number. I'm going to show you why it's called the perfect number. Okay, now go forward, because we're not going to be talking about Pastor's sermon about the chief cornerstone. We're going to be talking about the white stone dream. You see that? 1074, the white stone dream. Now remember the date. It was 3/11/09. Keep that in your mind. Okay, can I have my next slide? Because the great Kahan Shaul, his whole sermon was based on Revelation 2:17. So you see Revelation 2 is 1074. Let's turn there to Revelation 2:17 about this white stone. 2:17 on page 972 says, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the called out ones." I want you to remember something about 2:17. Revelation 2:17 is actually the 37th verse in Revelation. 37 is 37 or 777. Okay, you need to keep these in your mind because it's all tied to Pastor's 777 dream. And actually all these dreams he's had and these visions are all tied together, if you're taking notice. It's the 37th scripture in Revelation. If double 37 is 74, which is Pastor's other lot number. And 17 means to overcome and prevail. You know, Bollinger actually put that in Bollinger's commentary. Okay, now, Psalm 17 also speaks of the sentence of acquittal in Psalm 17 too, if you want to write that down for your notes. Also, double 17 is 34, which is when Pastor was born. So you can see how important this number is, 17. So let's read 2:17. Who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the called out ones. Can I have my next slide? You remember, next slide. Called out ones. This is 1074. So follow with me. To the called out ones of the house of Yahweh, to him who overcomes, I will give to eat of the hidden manna. Can I have my next slide? He who overcomes. Okay, it's mentioned 7 times in Revelation 2 and 3. Overcoming. Overcoming. Think of purple. Think of perfection. Okay, think of those sin no more. Think of those things we've learned. I will give him a white stone, a sentence of acquittal, and in the stone a restored name. Can I have the next slide? Okay, we see white stone, and you notice there's a number in the middle there, and that's Pastor's birth date. But also, if you remember, 828 is when he went to the United Nations, 828:00 in 2000. And 828 is also in the word Yisrayl, the word Israel. It comes from word number 8280. Remember, drop the 0. You're going to see Israel in this, okay? The perfect stone. The perfect stone, 1074. Remember the white stone. White signifying purity, okay? Pureness. And the white robe of humility. That's how we're going to obtain this white stone, okay? Can I have my next slide? The rock of perfection. Notice that, 1074. I'm hoping you're writing down these or going, at least go back later and study these. Can I have my next slide? A restored name. Remember what he's saying here. A restored name. Well, who restored? Who restored the book of Yahweh and the house of Yahweh? Who was involved in this? What was his name and when was he born? Can you tell me? Yisrayl Hawkins. That's why you see the 828. Can I have my next slide? Remember, he was hidden in Oklahoma, hidden to restore. Hidden to restore, 1074. Remember the great white buffalo, hidden to restore the house of Yahweh. Can I have my next slide? Now, you can make it your white stone. We can all make it our white stone by following in the footsteps of the greatest teacher in the world. We can make this white stone ours. Okay, we can make it ours. Okay, we can overcome, as the great deacon just before me just got done speaking about. Can we go to the next slide? Now, here's how we're going to do it. In 2010, when the great Kohan gave that sermon, it was in the 10th Roman month. Can we stay up on that slide, please? Okay, this is how we're going to do it. You see that picture? Let's look a little closer. We're going to believe into the one sent. Next slide. You see that? In him we trust. In him. Who's him? Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins. You see the arrow pointing at him? In him, Yisrayl Hawkins, we need to believe into the one sent. That's how we're going to obtain this white stone, okay, of acquittal, a sentence of acquittal. Can I have my next slide? Now, from the 13th book of Israel, part 1, Pastor says in chapter 1, verse 31, he says, if you remember the vision I had of the rain, but it was gold flakes that were falling. This occurred on 777. Did you remember that? That was the date, 777. I didn't remember that, but somebody told me. They wrote it down. 777, and he showed me gold. And of course, he said, now this is what it meant. I know now I'm going to turn you from this wood and metal and silver. I'm going to bring the gold out. So he had me arrested. He had me arrested because he's bringing us to the gold. So he had me arrested and put in jail because we were preaching this message to the world. And the world hates us. So I was arrested, wanting to stop this work. That's how much they love it. That's how much they loved it when Yeshua brought it. Can I have my next slide? Remember, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because of the testimony I bring against it that its works are evil. Is 1074. Who's that speaking about? Can I have my next slide? Because he preaches the laws of Yahweh. Now, let's look at where he was prosecuted. Next slide. At the Bared Court. Notice the lettering up there? Now, I'm not speaking evil of the Bared Court. They're only doing what their teacher taught them. And they've since said they were sorry for the things they've done. Praise Yahweh for that. And remember, we were taught to pray for our enemies. Okay? And remember, the V is in place of the U. Can I have my next slide? The Bared Courthouse, where 1074 was put on a display for the whole world. Is that a coincidence? No. They played a big part in the work of Yahweh and lifting the work up to the world. Okay? And remember our great overseer, the next slide. He went through this. It was a badge of honor to him. That's Yahshua's mouth. Remember what he was telling those deputies? Yahshua's mouth, 1074, he said, I'm teaching the same thing he did. Remember what he was telling them as they were leading him into the courtroom? How he was preaching the same thing Yahshua spoke. He's Yahshua's mouth. Can I have my next slide? He's also Yahshua's, the face and voice of Yahweh. There's the face and voice of Yahweh to us right there. You see that? Can I have my next slide? Now, when you add up all of his lot numbers, we brought this out before, you get 119. And I want you to think of Psalm 119. Can I have my next slide? Because in Psalm 119, 135, he says, make your face shine on your servants. Make your face shine on your servants. You see that shining face? How many of you would like to have a face that looks like that? I'm not talking about the beard, ladies, and I'm talking about the, that glow, that character. That, look at him smiling through the persecution. Look at this. Can we do that? Now, keep in mind Psalm 119. Actually, turn over there, please. Turn over to Psalm 119. Put up my next slide, please. Remember, Yahweh said, I am the Aleph and the Tau. In Psalm 119, you can read, you put the Aleph, Bet, Gamil, Daleth, He, Waz, Zayin, Chet, Teth, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Zadi, Kof, Resh, Shin, and Natau. And look whose number comes up. That's right, because that number is not a new number. It's only new because, well, license tags just came out in 1933 and 34 up there in where he got that tag right there. I showed the license plates. The first ones issued up there was in 1933 and 1934, the year that Pastor was conceived and born. Can I have my next slide? You can do the same thing again, only this time just put Hawkins at the end. Put Hawkins at the end and look what you get. What a coincidence. Can I have my next slide? You get 1074 for you in Radio Land. I know I got to say them because you won't see him on the radio like Daniel did. Okay, so Ecclesiastes 1, 9, and 10. It's on your screen. It says, that which has already been will be yet again. That which has already been done is what will be done again. There's nothing new. Is there anything of which it may be said, look, this is new? Notice, 1074. There's nothing new about that number. It's been from the beginning. We're just seeing it now, okay? And we're seeing it in all the books from Genesis to Revelation. It's already been in ancient times well before us. And you can also tie that in with the two Abels, the first Abel and the last Abel, okay? Remember that. It's not new, okay? This is just being renewed. It's being redone again, replayed again, another showdown, okay, between the two. Pope Francis and Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Now, Pastor's white stone dream was on 3/11/09. Notice how many days that was after 777. Remember, the perfect stone, and what makes us perfect, House of Yahweh? The laws of Yahweh. Remember Psalm 19:7. The laws of Yahweh are perfect, and they'll make us perfect. Remember Psalm 119:96 says, the perfection required and embodied in your laws is boundless. Notice the number, 613. Okay, notice that. It's not a coincidence. Can I have my next slide? And remember when Pastor had his 777 dream, he said, today is the 777, 777, 777. Notice the number 711. 711 means purple. Can I have my next slide? Remember, we went from the red, gold, green, and purple. 777. You see that? Is that a coincidence? No, it's not, because Yahweh's going to prove to be a unity in these last days. Can I have my next slide? Yahweh's a unity. 1074, Deuteronomy 6:4. You want to be part of the real royal family, House of Yahweh? Not the one in the United Kingdom across the ocean. The one right here. The United Kingdom right here. In this, by the way, Ireland in the south is not part of the UK. I'm sorry, I have to correct myself from last week. It was actually the one in the north there. But can we have my next slide? The United Kingdom, 1074, home of the true royal family. Okay, the purple, remember? Can I have my next slide? The United Nation. You see that? 1074. And remember, they're going to come to us, House of Yahweh, and the obedience of the nations are going to belong to us right here. Okay, the United Nation. There's not going to be a bunch of nations everywhere. He's going to make us one nation. One nation under Israel and Yahshua and Yahweh, okay? Everybody like that idea? You know, speaking of the United Nations, can I have my next slide? Bawa Jain, if you notice, his real name was Preminder Nath Jain. He's the one that opened the door at the UN for pastor. Notice his number, 1074. Wow, all this just must be a coincidence, House of Yahweh. Or Yahweh's been at work really hard in this plan this whole time, right? Can I have my next slide? The perfect nation, 1074. And when you add up all those numbers, it's 1865, which means liberty. Liberty. Liberty, that reminds me of Psalm 119:45. We walk at liberty because we seek your precepts. Can I have my next slide? We walk at liberty, see that? Because we believe into the one sent. You see the word liberty? And look at 2010, just drop the 2 zeros. That's 21, that's 777. That's why all these things were done when they were done. Okay, now, I got to switch gears for a moment. The Pope's armies, we've shown this before. Papal armies, remember, was 666. And I want you to remember something about Revelation 6. You know, a bow is given to this Vatican to make war. The NATO Deputy Secretary General to Vatican City. Notice they go to meet with the Pope. This is from NATO's own website. NATO Secretary General meets Pope Francis. This is from the NATO website, by the way. And I want you to notice these gematrias here. NATO Wars 666. And remember, who's pulling the strings? It's the Pope's bow. It's the Pope's bow. NATO 666, Pope's bow. And here we go. Here's an article. The NATO, the tool of European neo-fascism and Pope's blessed silence. The Pope's involved with this. NATO, remember, that's his tool. It's Rome's tool, NATO, 666, okay? And why is it given to him? Notice this. And power was given to them over a fourth part of the earth to kill. 666. That's Revelation 6 for your notes if you want to read it. And at this time, I've got to get out of here, but it's been a blessing and an honor and privilege. Go back and research these slideshows. You know, if you didn't get everything, go back and, you know, you'll find plenty yourself. It's not a coincidence. Yahweh is working with this house and this house only. So if you'd all please stand. It's my great honor and opportunity to present to you the great Kohan Yehuda Hawkins.
What I'm going to talk about today is something that we've been working on for several days. In fact, I worked on it last night till about 11:30. But I want you to turn to Revelation 12, verses 1 through 5 on page 978 to start out. We'll read this, and then I want to point out some things. Revelation 12, verses 1 through 5 on page 978. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried out, laboring in birth, in pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon her heads. And her tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. In other words, she deceived 1/3 of the Malachim. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to be delivered in order to devour her son as soon as he was born. And she brought forth a man, a son, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her son was caught up unto Yahweh and to his throne. What the Apostle Yochanan said here, it's assumed that he came up with it on his own. He was a man of Yahweh. He was a humble man. He would listen to other men of Yahweh, and he would not waver from the truth. But Yochanan said what he learned in these last days. When he said, I saw. When you say, I see, in other words, I understand. I see. I've learned this. That's why he said, I see. But what he learned, there would be a woman that brings forth a man-child who would be strict but fair. And we'll show that in a minute. But what scripture written by the prophets was the one Yochanan said he saw, that told him there would be a woman in childbirth who would bring a male child who would be a strict but just man. Who is this woman and who is this man? Let's start with the man. Remember, it said rod of iron. Now, that does not mean he was carrying a piece of railroad track around somebody ready to hit somebody on the head with it. What it means is this, and Acts 7:52 points it out. Turn to 847 in your book of Yahweh. Let's find out who this man was with the rod of iron and what the rod of iron is. Acts 7:52, page 847 in your book of Yahweh. This was when there were people, when the Sanhedrin was arguing with the apostles, and one of them got stoned over this. Which of the prophets have not your father persecuted? And they have slain those who foretold the coming of the just one. A rod of iron meant he was a very just and very strict but just man. Keep the laws of Yahweh. Don't be fooled into thinking I've come to do away with the law. I have come to enforce and establish it. Matthew chapter 5. And whom you have now become to betray and murderers. So the man is Yeshua. And the book of Acts 7:52 points this out. Now, who is this woman? Who is this woman that Yochanan learned about? We find that in the book of Jeremiah 23, verse 19 on page 592. The scripture reads, Behold, a whirlwind of Yahweh has gone forth in fury, even a grievous whirlwind. It will fall grievously upon the head of the wicked. In other words, Yahweh is going to take them out with a bunch of tornadoes, isn't he? Oh, he's such a horrible God. But the thing is, it said Yahweh is above anything that is a God. Because he's not a God. He's better than that. The word whirlwind that is written twice in Jeremiah 12:20. Oh boy. Jeremiah 23 verse 19 is translated from the Hebrew word sore. A Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius Verge, pages 989 and 1287, shows this word means to be disquieted, deprived of peace, the word of Yahweh, and Abel. The word fury, and we'll have more about this fury next week. The word fury that is written in Jeremiah 23:19 is translated from the Hebrew word Hamah. This word is listed on page 475 of volume 1 of the Hebrew Aramaic English Dictionary by Marcus Jastrow, which shows this word means messenger of justice. Remember, Yeshua was a just man. In other words, he was a messenger of justice. Who else is doing that? Does anybody have an idea? The words grievous and fall grievously that are written in Jeremiah 23:19 are translated from the Hebrew words matachulal and yahul, both of which are form of the Hebrew word hul. A Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon of the Old Testament by Julius First, page 426, shows this word means to rise, to have pains of a woman bringing forth. Hey, this is where he got this. The word head that is written in Jeremiah 23:19 is translated from the Hebrew word rash. A Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon of the Old Testament by Julius First, pages 3 and 4, 197 and 1271, shows this word means house, father, and Yahweh. Get that in your notes if you don't mind. The word wicked that is written in Jeremiah 23:19 is translated from the Hebrew word rashoim. This word is listed on page 558 of volume 7 of the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew by David Klein. So this word means one who forgets Yahweh, one who denies Yahweh's existence. So this is what Jeremiah 23:19 is saying. Behold, from Abel, the word of Yahweh, the message of justice has gone forth. Behold, a woman bringing forth the word of Yahweh, the message of justice, through the just one Yeshua, as Acts 7:58 says, and as the House of Yahweh today says. For this woman who is bringing forth the word of Yahweh, the message of justice to those who do not know Yahweh. Listen to this. For this woman who is bringing forth the word of Yahweh, the message of justice to those who do not Yahweh, is the house of Father Yahweh. The woman that was bringing forth in Revelation was the house of Yahweh. It says the house was persecuted, and it has been. Many of us were falsely accused. Pastor was hauled in and thrown in jail. Many of the others, we were ready, they were preparing to get us in there too, until Yahweh intervened, and he did. The whole point of the matter is this. The house of Yahweh is the woman who brings forth the man, the just man, Yeshua. We don't preach Yeshua like some assemblies do. We don't preach Jesus, Jesus, Yeso. That's a woman's name, by the way. All of those things we don't preach. We preach the just man, Yeshua, the messenger who brings justice. And that has been passed on because it said that messenger of justice went to be with Yahweh. But he pointed out, and the prophets pointed out, there would be another one to continue the work that brings the message of justice at the house of Yahweh, the house of Father Yahweh in these last days. Jeremiah 23:20 on page 592. It says, Jeremiah 23:20, page 592. The anger of Yahweh will not return until it has executed and performed the thoughts of his heart. In the latter days you will understand it perfectly. Remember, it said the man was taken up to be with Yahweh. But the work went on. The word anger that is written in Jeremiah 23:20 is translated from the Hebrew word af. This word is listed on page 99 of volume 1 of the Hebrew Aramaic English Dictionary by Castro, which shows this word means justice. That's a very serious word. What Jeremiah 23:20 says, Yeshua went to be with Yahweh. But it said the house of Yahweh will keep on bringing that message of justice. Be the messengers of justice, which every one of you will be and are. And it says when this job will be done. The justice of Yahweh will not return until he has executed and performed the thoughts of his heart. In the latter days you will understand it perfectly. In these last days. I pray every one of you understand this perfectly. If you do, you will say, get thee hence, Satan, and you will be staying here forever. May Yahweh bless your understanding, and I turn the services over to the great Kohan Ilya. I can't get these pages to get up. I'm sorry, it takes a little.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Now, continuing along with the things that we see and understand in these last days, knowing how the prophets and apostles of old learned these things, of course, we see flooding, as Joshua said there would be, flooding, earthquakes, disease, and pestilence in place after place. But in Japan, we see enormous flooding taking out entire towns at this time. Now, keeping this in mind, because as we're having severe flooding in Japan, you have the Rio Grande, which runs from the Colorado mountains down to the border of the Texas-Mexico border. Well, where the Rio Grande starts is completely dried up. They're driving four-wheelers in it. There's nothing there. Completely dry. And then you have in Iraq, remember we brought out about Iran last week and about the Middle East, how they're saying enormous drought. It's the most drought-stricken area of the world. Well, in Iraq, they have no water, and now the Ministry of Agriculture has forbid them to raise rice products and basic cereal-type products, which is a staple for their economy there. But also remember that there's a problem with raising food because agriculture is such a strong part, and if they can't raise the agriculture due to lack of water, and then the Ministry of Agriculture says you cannot grow these things, that shuts them down. Don't forget where Henry Kissinger said, if you control the food, you control the people. And don't forget, they're saying that that area of the earth needs to be depopulated. There's too many people. That's what they're blaming, is the amount of people. And then moving into Raqqa. Raqqa is a huge city, once was a huge city, and remember, it sits on the banks of the Euphrates River, right there in Syria. The Euphrates River runs just to the south of that city. Now, that city once had 338,000 people, and it's very interesting to remember that city was initially built by the Byzantine Empire. That was a Roman Empire back in around 244 to 245 AY. Well, it was taken over by a Muslim conqueror who came in, and it became a Muslim town. Well, now you see the Roman Catholic Church going back again. Of course, it's basically destroyed. But what I want you to notice, and if you remember Mosul, we brought this out before, what they're having a problem with right now, the millions and billions of dollars that was spent to bomb this city. Enormous amounts of money. Well, now they have dead, hundreds of thousands of dead bodies in all of the rubble. You can smell the death. Pestilence is going to come from the death. They're trying to bury them, but not many people are wanting to help them. If you wanted to kill people, that's a great way to do it. Let the disease spread. Watch what's going on and watch the lack of care and concern, and it's almost like intentionally being done to put forth disease. And then, of course, we also have President Duarte in the news again this week. He told the Catholic Church if they could prove to him in a very colorful way, we took all that out, that if God existed, he would resign as president. So he put an offer out there for the Catholic Church to try to take hold of. And then Libya. This is very interesting. Remember Libya with Muammar Gaddafi? Remember how sanctions were heavily put against Libya because Muammar Gaddafi stood against the ruling international order? Well, there's a new person who's been in the Libyan scenes for a while. He actually turned over, and this is very important, he turned over all oil exports, the control of them, to the internationally recognized National Oil Corporation. So all of their oil exports have been turned over to a group of people that complied with the sanctions that were put on by the United States, France, the UK, and Italy. And since they complied, now their oil is free to go into the market. But they complied with sanctions. They were suppressed so much that they actually have complied because they want to reap some of the benefits off their oil. And then President Trump this last week in a NATO meeting, and this is very important because they say it's rare for the discussion of oil to come up in a NATO meeting. It very rarely ever comes out in the meeting. It's discussed behind the scenes, but not in the open. Well, if you remember, we brought out how Russia was running a pipeline all the way to Germany for natural gas. So Germany will be able to benefit from the Russian natural gas, which Russia has an enormous supply of natural gas. Keep in mind that Germany is part of NATO, and also keep in mind what Malachi Martin said about China and Russia is looking to come out on top. The Vatican is looking to come out on top, and the United States is looking to come out on top. With all of that put together, of course, President Trump challenged Germany in their loyalty to NATO. And how loyal are you to standing against Russia? And all of these things, he also at the end of it said everyone needs to meet their quota, put in more money, and then he upped the percentage of what everyone should pay. Now keep this in mind. This is a member of NATO who's going in and he's telling everyone what they need to do. Well, keep in mind, if you've got a business, if you've got anything and you're wanting more money to go into it, well, why would you need more money? You have a bigger operation. You have something more you need to do. We're going to see NATO be part of this depopulation and this putting forth a lot of death in and around our world. And then if you remember the trade wars, the United States and China going tit for tat, the United States just upped the ante to $200 billion, or they announced they're planning to up that ante to $200 billion. That will eventually start to affect what they call the little man. In other words, the everyday product that you buy will eventually see these tariffs. That will affect the economy greatly in the United States if it's allowed to get out that far. And then Prince William to Israel, Pastor brought that out last week to show you that the president of Israel actually asked Prince William, when you meet with a boss, talk to him about peace. Now, Jared Kushner, remember that's the president's son-in-law, he also brought out in an interview with a Palestinian newspaper that he would like to meet with the Palestinian Authority concerning this peace plan. The Jerusalem Post just put out this morning that Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries are saying if the Palestinian Authority leaders will not listen, then they should take it to the people. Just bypass the leadership altogether. Remember, the people are supposed to be the ones that vote them in. It'll be interesting to see how that takes place. And then last but not least, the meeting that Pope Francis had last week, pay close attention to this because he summoned 19 leaders, religious leaders. Look for those that you'll notice are the kings of the East. You'll see some of them. But he greeted each one hand by hand. We don't have all that in. We'll have more of that as we go. But he shakes each one of their hands as they go into the grottos. Well, that's where they keep the dead saints. That's where they go worship the dead. Well, he brings them in and he tells them that they're there to pray for peace in the Middle East. Don't forget the first thing that Pope Francis released last week in his meeting was climate change and how it needs to be implemented with concrete steps now. That's depopulation. And if you'll notice, they say that Christianity used to be 20% in that part of the world. Now it's only 4%. Well, that's a huge problem for the Catholic Church, but that's a great way to depopulate because those are the people you don't want anyway. So pay close attention. Remember depopulation, the quartet, how it's given unto them to cause hunger, literally cause hunger by themselves, but all this death and destruction that you see, Pastor brought out many years ago would take place in that 4th part of the earth before it ever started, and that's the key point. If we get it this time, please go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins, where we're seeing some great extremes in the weather taking place right now. On one hand, we have extreme rain and flooding. On another hand, we have extreme drought, and of course that's affecting the agriculture. And then we also have in the news President Duterte in the Philippines, who has actually thrown out a challenge to anyone who can prove to him that God actually exists. First, we're going to start off in Japan, where more than 100 people have been killed and many more are not accounted for in the worst flooding that has occurred in 35 years. Search and rescue efforts continue in southwestern Japan, looking for survivors trapped in homes due to flooding and mudslides. At times, the rain fell in torrents with as much as 3 inches per hour falling. Even though the rains have now subsided from the weekend, temperatures are forecasted to be in the 90s, and of course there are fears of heat stroke as many people are left homeless, and some of those people are elderly.
Well, Japan seems to be getting more than its desired share of water. Here in the U.S., the 4th largest river, the Rio Grande, is drying up. In what was once a bed of flowing river, conservationist Thomas Archdeacon drives a UTV on the now dry riverbed. Now, the river usually only dries out in the middle of summer, but was parched in the middle of spring. Archdeacon said that there's been less snowpack from the Colorado mountains and less water over the long run.
Hydrologists have diverted water flow to people in need and to farms and towns. One farmer, Nick Carrasco, is on the waiting list behind other farmers for water to his crops, to water his crops. Now, he says his property borders the river, and he worries that they may actually run out of water before they get to him, and he, of course, has to wait for the next go-round before he can get the water, much-needed water, to water his crops.
And I can't imagine what it would be like being on a waiting list to get water, a vital, something needed for life, and you're on a waiting list.
And not only just to be able to water his crops, but that provides his livelihood as well. So it's got to be very difficult.
Well, Derek Alente, who sits on the Water and Natural Resources Committee, said that people used to pump water from the ground, and now they pump it directly from the river. When asked why he thought that was the case, he said it's cheaper, better, and they need the water to wash their Mercedes. Well, many believe the towns are using more water from the river than before, too much. Now, the population in the valley has doubled in the past 30 years, and that population now isn't concerned with water conservation.
Well, they say, the old saying, they won't miss the water until the well runs dry.
Until it's gone.
Well, although there are conservation efforts, those efforts might not be enough. Average temperatures have risen 1.5 degrees in the region over the last 20 years.
Well, Iraq's Diwani province is also experiencing drought conditions as well. Now, fields lie empty because of lack of water, and unusually harsh drought has caused the agricultural ministry to suspend the production of rice, corn, and other cereals. Now, one farmer among many who was furious over the decision said, "Do they want us to die? We want the rice and vegetables. What are we supposed to beg in the streets? Are we supposed to beg in the streets?" He said. Farmers say their lives depend on agriculture.
The government says that it will compensate farmers, particularly rice producers, but many fear that promise will not be kept, jeopardizing a long tradition and compromising a much-needed staple food used across the country. So they're apparently very dependent on not only the growth of rice for their own consumption, but also as a commodity to sell to other people as well.
Well, Raqqa was once a thriving city, but after ISIS came and the U.S.-led coalition chased them there, the coalition leveled 90% of the city. Now, locals are picking up the pieces and have been for years. One of the worst things there are the bodies. Hundreds, thousands rotting under the rubble in sweltering heat. Now, people from all walks of life, including rebels, civilians, and soldiers, buried under the debris, waiting to be removed and buried. And that's not the first time we've talked about a city like that where that smell of death just permeates everything. They said it's nothing like you've ever smelled before, but to have that many bodies rotting, I can only imagine after 90% of the city is gone what that must be like.
Yeah, and then the guys like Mr. Assad here, whose job it is to actually find those bodies, dig them out in the sweltering heat, retrieve them so that they can be properly disposed of or buried, which they have, as we're going to talk about here, some mass graves. Assad al-Mas'houj and his team, they actually have this job of digging up bodies day after day using pickaxes and shovels to bury them in mass graves. Now, he was going to school for a medical degree but never completed that. His experience now has made him a pathologist. In just several hours, they dig up about 80 bodies. Now, he's been at this for over 7 months, and his hope is that the city will give them more equipment and gear to do their jobs. They're understaffed, they're underfunded. He said a city like Raqqa actually should have more resources to carry out the task of burying the dead and cleaning up the rubble, but they don't. And after all that has occurred in Raqqa, the international community has remained silent, and no one has even lent a helping hand.
That's one of the effects you see of war. What once was a thriving city now becomes reduced to basically a pile of rubble, almost inhabitable, because everything is destroyed.
Yep, totally desolate.
Well, even the Americans have said that no one will ever know how many people have died in Raqqa.
Wow. Well, Duterte is in the news, yet once again angering the Catholic Church and Christians worldwide with his latest challenge. He said he'd quit if someone could prove to him that God exists. He has in the past defied the Catholic Church on many topics, sometimes even using explicitives or expletives in his speeches concerning them. Now, many want to know, is it worth taking him up on this challenge or just ignore him? Also, what will be the Catholic Church's response, if any?
Well, oil has been a hot topic in the Middle East and continues to be. This time, Libya is in the news, actually receiving a little bit of pressure regarding their oil. Our field correspondent, Larry McGee, has the story. Larry, who is putting the pressure on Libya, and what is Libya planning on doing?
For years, the lifeblood of the global economy has been oil, and over the course of the last few years, there has been a lot of human bloodshed in an effort to keep it that way. In oil-rich Libya, reputed warlord Khalifa Haftar has turned over control of key oil export terminals in the nation, citing his country's best interests as the cause. Commentators argue that international pressure coming from the UK, the United States, France, and others had a strong part to play in the decision. After fighting it out with local competitors for control of the terminals, Mr. Haftar then delivered them to the country's national oil corporation in Tripoli. The vice president of Libya's presidential council, Ahmed Makti, gave a televised congratulations to all Libyans for resuming oil exportation and offered his thanks and hopes that the restart will be profitable for everyone. The leader also commended those whom he believes acted rationally and labored on the side of reason to end the crisis. In the area extending from Tripoli to Benghazi, the country is reported to have over 45 billion barrels in oil reserves, in addition to large amounts of gas in 3 of the nation's largest oil fields. The region also houses 5 of the country's major ports, including Sidra, which is reported to export 400,000 barrels per day, and Ras Lanuf, which exports 220,000. Money and economics is also at the root of major conflicts elsewhere. President Trump is making headlines this week after confronting Germany at a recent NATO summit over collaboration with Russia on a resource deal. The president says Germany is being held captive because of the agreement, which delivers natural gas from Russia to Germany through the Nord Stream pipeline. Up until now, the issue is reported to have been a matter for the sidelines and has never enjoyed official discussion at NATO, since the organization is said to strive to keep business separate from security. President Trump is thought by some analysts to be motivated by the desire to increase American sales of gas to Europe, and particularly to have Germany drop its deal with Russia and re-sign with the U.S. In a bid to gain his way, the president is employing other tactics as well, subtly implying that unless certain conditions are met, the U.S. might refrain from offering its military support towards the protection of certain nations. This, analysts say, is a red line, since Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty is held as the bedrock of the accord, which basically commits each member state to consider an armed attack against one member state as an armed attack against them all. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. It's on Jeff. Back to you.
Well, the United States is definitely not pleased with Germany maintaining its course of doing business with Russia regarding this natural gas pipeline. Well, Donald Trump has already been accused of imposing trade policies that could harm the U.S. and its allies, but now he threatens to do even more. In a recent meeting with the Dutch Prime Minister, the president told reporters, "We're not planning anything now, but if they don't treat us properly, we will be doing something."
Well, the they Mr. Trump was referring to is the World Trade Organization, also referred to as the WTO. His comments came after a report by the Axios news website, which said Trump's administration has drafted proposed legislation which would allow Trump to raise tariffs at will and negotiate special tariff rates with specific countries. Now, both of these are basic violations of the WTO rules.
Initially, the U.S. made the first move in this trade issue by imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, Washington may possibly do the same thing with foreign-made vehicles and auto parts which are imported, regardless of the warnings that this could directly hurt America's car industry. Not to mention, it could also lead to countermeasures by some of America's top trading partners who would be affected as well.
One such partner is Germany. This week, Chancellor Angela Merkel predicted a trade war on the horizon if there is no de-escalation. She told German lawmakers, "We have tariffs on aluminum and steel, and it appears cars, too, will be imposed with tariffs when they're imported into the United States." Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this has the character of a trade conflict.
But the trade conflict didn't begin with America's European allies, and the Chinese are not backing down. With the latest round of $34 billion in U.S. tariffs, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said as long as the United States issues a so-called tariff list, China will take necessary measures to firmly protect its legitimate interest.
Well, the U.S.'s trading partners, including the European Union, China, and Japan, have all taken their concerns to the WTO. There is real cause for their concern because the rules-based global trading system they are all very familiar with could collapse under the current conditions.
Susan Aronson from the Institute for International Economic Policy told Al Jazeera, "In general, people want trade to be under a set of rules so that there's certainty and predictability. And what Trump has done has totally undermined the system. So it's not just what he's actually put in place, it's what he's threatened to do and what that does to trust."
But the president doesn't seem too concerned about maintaining that trust and has even mentioned the possibility of pulling out of the World Trade Organization, which would change the status quo that has been operating for well over half a century.
Wow. Well, never has hope and reconciliation been more needed. I know I share a desire with all of you and your neighbors for just and lasting peace. Well, those words were spoken by Prince William as he addressed an Israeli audience this week, which included Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife.
Now, the prince has traveled to the region for a tour on both sides of the fence, lasting 4 days. While it was said that the visit would be non-political, Prince William did not only meet with the Prime Minister, but sat down and talked with the President of Israel and is scheduled to visit the West Bank, where he will be greeted by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas.
Knowing the prince would cross the border into occupied Palestine the following day, President Rivlin asked if he would deliver a message of peace to President Abbas on his behalf. President Rivlin also told the Duke of Cambridge that he was writing a new page in history. This is the first time ever for any royal to have officially visited the nation of Israel. This is a very big deal to Israel and, for sure, no ordinary royal visit.
Well, another very big deal for Israelis and Palestinians is talk of a new peace plan. President Trump's senior advisor, Jared Kushner, in an exclusive interview with Al-Quds, a Palestinian newspaper, explained that Trump is ready and willing to work with President Abbas to find a peace plan both sides can agree to.
For some time now, the White House has been saying they have a plan to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. However, President Abbas has refused to talk with them ever since Mr. Trump made his controversial announcement recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, while at the same time moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Al-Quds reported Mr. Kushner as saying, "They want to see a deal that respects the dignity of the Palestinians and puts an actual solution to the issues that have been discussed for decades. They all insist the Al-Aqsa Mosque should continue to be open to all Muslims who wish to pray there."
Well, Pope Francis is also talking about Middle East peace. On Saturday, the Pope will pray for peace in the region. He will meet with Catholic patriarchs of Eastern churches and representatives of Orthodox churches.
Cardinal Leonardo Sandri, who's organizing the visit, and Cardinal Kurt Cook, who is coordinating with the Orthodox churches, spoke of the upcoming visit at the Vatican. Cardinal Leonardo said, "We hope that those responsible for the world situation, especially those in these regions, will listen to this prayer. It may indirectly touch their consciences so they don't follow force or violence, but look for a political solution."
Cardinal Kurt Koch added, "The Catholic Church wants all Eastern churches and all Orthodox churches to be present because they're all concerned about the situation of Christians in Syria and the Middle East." Well, representatives and leaders of 19 churches along with the Pope will attend, first praying together for peace and then meeting behind closed doors to discuss the situation in the Middle East.
Although all those living in the region suffer the consequences of the violence, it has provoked a fleeing for Christians. 100 years ago, they were 20% of the population, and now they are only 4%. Now, among them are Catholics, Orthodox, Armenians, and Lutherans. And Katana, as we see, this peace plan is definitely on the minds of several of today's leaders. We see some people getting involved, like Prince Williams, who hasn't mentioned that, or we haven't seen him be concerned with the peace plan in the past. Right. Of course, Jared Kushner has been actively involved, and some are saying that his inexperience with dealing with both sides might give him the advantage to actually finding a peace plan, or I guess getting the peace plan active again, for both sides that they both can agree with. So the peace plan, as we know, this is something that Yisrayl Hawkins has talked about for years on how important it is with the prophetic timeline and what events are centered around the restarting of this peace plan.
All right, and interestingly enough, many people may not be very familiar with the history of it. Some young people today may not have even been born when this took place, but they had that meeting and the signing on the White House lawn when President Bill Clinton was in office in September of 1993, which this particular peace plan, which has been discussed many, many times before, actually was initiated or taken into effect October 13th, 1993. So it's been a long period of time since then up to where we are now, because it was put on hold about 3.5 years later in 1997 by Benjamin Netanyahu. And so there's been a real struggle for the Palestinians and the Israelis to actually sit down and to negotiate the reinstitution of this plan and the terms that was already agreed to. So it'll be nice to see how this progresses over the next few months, since we have new players, so to speak, that are in the game.
And although Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, although he still insists on not giving in and not wanting to restart that peace plan, we know that through the teachings that Yisrayl Hawkins has brought forth, that peace plan will be started again. It will be put back into action. That's so right. It's going to be really interesting to see how it comes about and how they get it back in action again, and to see the events that are centered around it.
That's right. Well, to find out more about the peace plan, how it was prophesied, and what the Holy Scriptures actually show how it is going to unfold, you can contact the House of Yahweh for more information. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine, Here's How. You can write the House of Yahweh by writing them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can also email the House of Yahweh by just sending them an email at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, for those of you who are desirous to learn more about the Holy Scriptures and the prophecies therein, you can use one of the best and free study resources on the internet, the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael program. And you can simply find them by merely typing in YisraelSays.com or AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, another important message from Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, from all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.
At this time, if everyone would please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrayl, Abel Hawkins.
Hey, Shalom. Hey, Shalom. Shalom, everyone. Hey, Yahweh. Okay, let's go. Come on. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Well, I can't tell you how joyous I am at this with this news, and the fact that we can show it to you here. I mean, as it takes place. I mean, this is prophecy being fulfilled right in front of our eyes. Yes, praise Yahweh. And there's a bunch more yet to come, of course. That the worst part of man's governments and is yet to come. The worst part of sin is yet to be shown. If you noticed from the gematria, everything that belongs to Satan, everything is run by Satan and the gods. It's got a 666 tack to it. Everything, every work that we're involved in has a 1074 tack to it. And of course, I've got 3 license plates, and they all are used by Yahweh to prove that this is His work. And what we're doing, what the House of Yahweh is doing, is what the prophets and apostles did, warning the world. In fact, this, if you'll get it in your mind, that the prophets' warnings and the history recorded of what took place, of their warning, also the apostles' warnings, they didn't go to anyone but us. They were taken captive in 70 AY, taken captive when the temple was moved to Rome, Jerusalem destroyed, all the wealth, everything was taken to Rome. And they were held captive there until the time came for this work to start. And Yahweh brought them back, and the first thing I saw was a King James Version of the book of Yahweh. That's what I was brought up on. But I'm one of the first to get it. That's when it was brought back. It was held captive. It wasn't written for anyone else except us. We're it. Praise Yahweh. And of course the gematria proves this. It shows the work that Yahweh is doing, running abreast of the work that Satan is doing, has done from the very beginning, bringing forth evil like the gods. This week the article, Yisrayl Hawkins states Yahweh never identified himself as a god, not in any of the original scriptures. We're getting a lot of comments on this around the world, from Rome. That had quite a few from Rome. One of them says, wow, Yahweh. That was a very, very powerful lesson today. And of course, it's speaking of Psalms 19. Psalms 19, another one says, Psalms 19 is about the house of Yahweh. Wow, praise Yahweh. I'm glad they got that. You know, they're commenting. Most of the, if you understand that, And you know that most of this work, I mean, this was not written for the people back then, even though they benefited with it. It was actually written for this work that we're doing, a work that's going to stop war. Yes, that's what all nations are involved in, and of course that's what you saw in the news here. Trump's agenda with NATO is to gather money for war. That's the whole agenda of President Trump right now in this meeting, going from one bunch to another. The G7 next, and I forgot where all of his trips are. This one says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, great house of Yahweh. I see verse 4, their witness referring to, still referring to that Psalms 19 that I covered last week. Now, of course, we're working, the elders are working right up to the last minute. Before this begins, they're putting together articles. David Yahuda was wanting more time, and I said, no, take part of it off and we'll cover it next week. But I got to have that in that you covered on Revelations, and because it fits into the sermon here today. The great Kohan Benjamin Krause Hawkins, he was wanting more time. I said, no, I've got to have time to cover all this other, but just take off some and we'll finish that one the next time. This information that you heard, you're going to have to remember it. What David Berner brought out, you won't understand those scriptures. You won't understand it if you don't understand the way they should be translated. There's all kinds of lies brought forth in the King James Version to make Yahweh look like a vicious God. The fact is, Yahweh been warning the nations, what you're doing is causing the curses. You commit fornication, adultery, sodomy, you're going to cause sickness and disease in your body. The book of Romans, the first chapter, the Apostle Shaul said this very thing, that I'm just repeating what he said, and that's exactly the cause of it. How did he know? He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a doctor, he was a soldier. How did he know that this was causing sickness and disease to the human body? The scriptures are inspired by Yahweh. Those scriptures, Yahweh allowed them to be changed, and he said our job is to straighten them out. That's what we're doing. We've been working on it for years. And of course, the first thing was that Yahweh is the name of the Creator. He's not a God. Gods are ones who promote themselves above others. They didn't come to serve, they come to be served. That's the difference in them and Yeshua. Yeshua is not a God either. This man says, I just left the Christian church and their Jesus. And many, I won't say the name, but many, they ridicule me, but I must and will receive the truth about Yahweh. I was, praise Allah, I was so scared not to call him Jesus, but I have been researching like crazy. Please help me to know the truth. So many of my family and friends believe in Jesus, Christ our Lord. I am crying inside about all the lies that's been told. Again, thanks, we have to get the truth out as soon as possible. Praise God. Another one, which is the genuine name of the Savior. By the way, all of these questions we're getting this group of questions, which was quite long, was asked Google. And Google referred them to Yahweh.com. The two news releases previous to that are still increasing. This one, which is normally about 57,000, is up to 385,000 this week. This is a new one this week. And it's up to 385,000. News media is running it. The one for last week's up to 520,000. And the one before that now is still climbing, 617,000. So we are reaching the world, every spot on the globe, as Psalms 19 said. Psalms 19. Remember that sermon. If you don't remember these things, you know, there's an opportunity for Satan to get in. And this is a great thing to spend your extra time on, you know. I think time wasted is you're hurting yourself with it. Now, I want you to get this in your mind. NATO. That's the reason I wanted the news brought on NATO, and the reason I wanted the 666. And I didn't give Benjamin much time on that one. I called him when he was going on stage, I think. So I said, I've got to have this morning. Well, I've got to have more time. So I said, Shaul, just tell him to quash something else and put this in, because I got to have this. But this NATO, in fact, the whole quartet is 666. It's tied in with, and we're running abreast of, the House of Yahweh work. And that's the reason you see it connected with us. They represent the four horns of the golden altar. I can't dwell on that much, but we're the ones that's going to chop those horns off. Those horns, those goring horns. Well, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also called the North Atlantic Alliance, is an intergovernmental military alliance between 29 North American and European countries. Now, this is a big organization. And why was it established? North American countries, let's see, 29 North American and European countries. North America comprises 23 countries. So the remaining 6 are European countries. NATO was founded, if you need to write this down, NATO was founded in 4/4/1949. If it helps you any to remember, I was 15 years old when NATO was founded. 2 years after the Cold War. The United Nations was founded 10/24/1945. I was 11 years old when this was founded. 1 month after World War II ended. Formerly known as Soviet Union, Russia was established in 1991. Yes, 1991. Now, these didn't exist, but the scriptures told about them and told they were going to exist. The prophet Daniel told you this. Then Revelations gives you what you need to understand the book of Daniel. It finishes it out, tells you how it's going to end. it gives you the details. That's how we knew that many scriptures were mistranslated. And when we were working on this, we could see by comparing the two, along with other prophecies and the writings of the disciples, that we could see the mistranslations. So we'd go back into the authoritative books, and lo and behold, here was proof. And that's the way that most of the book of Yahweh was translated. It's just a lot of hard work that we're still doing. I told David, Shaul, that David had worked half of the night the other night on scriptures. He wasn't supposed to. I tell him to go home, but he won't do it. The USA was founded July the 4th, 1776. That scripture should stick in your mind now, because that was 200 years before I went into the work of Yahweh full time. 200 years. 200 years. And 1 month before, that's in July, 1 month before the month I was born, in 1776, 200 years, the plan started taking place to do this work that you and I are doing as a body here, called the Tree of Life. Yes, brought back. The quartet, there's quite a history behind them and the moves that had to take place for them to be invented. But they were invented, the quartet, in April 2002, after the 9/11 took place. Now, whether it was a set-up deal and brought forth, as some are saying, by the government, that was Fahrenheit 9/11, if you remember that movie that was put out, and showed some surprise looks, no surprise look on the president's face, President George Bush Jr. He had no surprise look when he was told that this took place. It's a movie you really ought to see. Now, whether that's true or whether this took place by an enemy who dreamed all of it up, I don't know. I just know that that was the start of the creation of the quartet, and in being able to persuade these four to unify themselves in war and bring forth and contribute to the money that goes into NATO. NATO is the Pope's army. That's what it's been called, NATO. Now remember that. Remember that. I've got some other stuff that's pretty much proving it. That I didn't write. I didn't write this stuff. Somebody else did. Pope's Democracy Mark. Let's see. You got three numbers here. 209, 1254, and Jewish 666. That's what they call the Jewish Hebrew democracy. Land of Pope's democracies. That was democracies. Pope's democracies, Mark 666. There we go. Okay. Now, land of Pope's democracies. Enter the word phrase. Land of Pope's democracies. Hebrew 666. Pretty convincing, huh? Everything that has to do with Satan and the gods is 666. You can pretty well count on that. That's the reason I've been so earnest in trying to get this out and get the book written, 666 book written. Also, the other tag numbers that Yahweh has tied us to, I don't know of a better way. I mean, the automobiles wasn't invented till this, just the last 2 generations. Tag numbers weren't needed on buggies, horses and buggies. They might have had them in New York, you know, you never can tell, but they're a late thing. But Yahweh put these numbers in the scriptures when he gave them to Abraham. When he gave them to Abel, he put them in there. The Hebrew language carried them. It was by accident that they discovered these numbers, and this was just here recently. When they discovered these numbers, I used the numbers in 76 to show the 666 and other things, but it was shortly before that the numbers were discovered, a whole set of numbers for this language, and I didn't know it. And then later, in Biblical Archaeology Review, I noticed that they had written a book called Bible Code. I already had Number and Scripture by Bullinger, which he's the first one that brought the book out. Now, he didn't discover it, but somebody else did by accident, but he got universities to working on it to bring it forward to sell as a book, of course. And then the next one came out was Hidden Codes of the Bible, and I called Shaul at that time, and I said, I've got to see this man and talk to him. And I think it was Hebrew men that we had met before in Israel in 82. But they brought this book introducing it, and it's the same thing but a different way. But these numbers came out for us, not for thousands of years ago, but they were there all those years and finally discovered now. Our ancestors that wrote the scriptures knew it. We plainly have it in the scriptures. His number is 666. That's the last verse in Revelation 13. Anyway, we went and talked to the man and got the book, and I had it all marked and tagged and taken away from me later. But anyway, we got it. Now, if you remember what was brought out in the news, remember this. The quartet here, Pope Francis, God has instructed me to revise the 10 Commandments. I didn't want that right now. I wanted this one. I'll get back to this. They're rewriting the 10 Commandments. They've already rewritten them, but now they're going to do it again because they don't like what they wrote. The Vatican deploys, now get this now, remember the quartet and the years there. Now, the Vatican, it's the Pope's army. NATO is the Pope's army, the Vatican's army. The Pope don't do anything. He's the mouth. He just delivers messages. He reads what the Vatican tells him to read. When he goes to the OPEC nations, he carries a message from the Vatican. And whatever he said, whatever the Vatican puts forth for them to do, years in advance, some of these things, I noticed the year 1414 on them. So, we know that they're coming forth from the Vatican, and plans made and carried out. They have to do several things to bring about certain things, like taking over Iraq, taking over the nation Iraq. The Vatican deploys its divisions in Iraq. If you can see the headlines here and read that for yourself, the Vatican deploys The Vatican deploys its divisions in Iraq under the banner of NATO. Under the banner of NATO. This is the Pope's army. Now, what has occurred in Iraq? Surely everyone knows that we went into Iraq, we took over the country, we took over the people. There's always thousands of people murdered, killed. Yemen, I was just told by the great Kohan Benjamin Hyler Hawkins, that Yemen, they can't bury the bodies fast enough. And they're putting the news out that they can't bury them. They're killing more of them than they can take care of. Now that causes diseases. It causes things like the bubonic plague that wiped out thousands and thousands of people. Well, here we see that coming in behind the United States in Iraq, we see NATO, the Pope's army. Get that in your mind now, because the news is taking place. NATO is fully involved. In an interview with Cardinal Sedano and an editorial in Avenir, invoke greater military support for Yahweh's government. Now that's the one they've put in office. What is he? Is he Catholic, pretending he's Muslim? Now, if this is so, and they use democracy, the word democracy, which they do, they use the democracy a lot to lie. If you look up the word democracy and you see what it actually means, and then you look at what they're doing, you can see they're not following their own words. But then they're the ones that win the war. Whoever wins the race whoever wins the race, he's got a right to speak out on history the way he wants to, right? I won it this morning. I ran off and left those two. I had witnesses now to this. Bill tried to cheat, but he no. You know what tickled me about this race now? I want to get this in before I quit. Y'all listen. This race, now I mentioned it, and then you heard this morning that it's fastened to my tag number. And I said, this week I asked, has anyone called in about this? Anyone called in about this race? Has anyone said anything to you? What is the gossip on the gossip line? Well, surprisingly, a bunch of young girls. Yeah. They was interested, and they were wanting to bring some sermons on it or something. I think I'm having a hard time remembering everything, but they were wanting to bring something out on it. They said that one of the comments was that one of the apostles spoke of the race. And I said, oh, wow. I said, I think I remember something about that. But anyway, you might look forward to what these young girls, and we had some young boys, too, that's wanting to bring sermons on it. I don't remember who they were, but somebody sent me a list of names. I'll try to bring that with me next week. But there's a lot on that running that race. You really need to look into it. And not just the young people either. The old people need to look into it. Keep your mouth shut about it. Let the young ones study it out. But anyway, what you see here is the Vatican running a race with the House of Yahweh. Hopefully, they've got in mind, Satan has in mind, that she can bring forth this war. Now, she says, no longer nuclear. Don't think nuclear anymore. Let's just wipe all this out and get it to where the house of Yahweh can't reach these people. Well, they're not going to be able to do that. The gates of hell will never prevail against the house of Yahweh. And our job is being fulfilled, and we got absolute proof of that. But anyway, the Catholic Church has their man in office, has their government set up, and now they're needing help, military help, from NATO. Military help. They don't have enough money with 2% being paid in, so Trump asked, double it. I want all of you to pay 4% now. Well, of course, this is the same routine that started with Nimrod. I'll get back to that because it came from Nimrod, then brought forward the kings, and each king wanted tribute to build an army. And his army, he had these police that wrote tickets. No, I got that confused with modern day army. That brings in a lot of money. So be careful. Don't break any laws. It's costly. The kings, they sent their army out. They said to the cafe owner in New York, the restaurant owner in New York, we'll protect you. I've got a gang here that will protect you. Protect me from what? Oh, from people starting fights in your restaurant and tearing up your restaurant. Well, I don't have that going on in here. You will if you don't pay us. Well, this is an offshoot from trick or treat. You either give me you either treat me or I'm going to pull a trick on you. So pay me. Well, the kings from Genesis 10, they form kings. We want kings to rule over us like all other nations. So the kings, they would go out and say, we'll protect you, but you've got to pay us this amount of tribute, 2%, 4%, 10%, whatever. They named the tribute. Now, if they didn't want to do it, then the army would come back later, a bigger army, and they would wipe out those who opposed, take the others in as slaves, and force their way, force the tribute to be paid. In this way, the Roman army was built, the great Roman army. That's the way it was built, and the Apostle Shaul gave us a great example in Acts. I think it's about the 10th chapter. Well, what you're seeing here is the same thing. It's still carried out, but only a different way. But it's bringing in, I want you to turn over to Revelations, the 6th chapter, and I want you to see exactly what's taking place here in prophecy. What you're seeing here is Trump saying, increase the tribute here. Why does he want them to pay to NATO? He made the statement, it's America first. But he's saying we need to support NATO. NATO is the Pope's army. He and the Pope are supposed to be at odds with each other, right? And yet he's saying give more support for the Pope's army. The Pope, I just read you the article, the Vatican deploys its divisions in Iraq under the banner of NATO. They have their government set up, and they're going to vote him in under the disguise of democracy. Now, if he's a Catholic, he's going to push for Catholicism. And I would say that's probably what he is. But here in Revelation 6, it goes back further than that. It starts with Revelations 1 and Yeshua opening the seals. Yeshua Messiah. Remember Hebrews 1:1. He said Yahweh spoke to his people through the prophets at one time in earlier days. He didn't do away with the prophets speaking. You've got to have the prophets speaking. You can't follow Christianity and do away with the prophets. The prophets, the law and the prophets, Isaiah 8 says if they speak not according to the law and the prophets, it's because there's no truth in them. Well, there's no truth in the Catholic Church, no truth in Christianity, or any of the 4,000, is it 120, 80, almost 5,000 religions out there following the Pope into war. Well, Hebrews now said, in the last days, he has spoken to us in the last days. Well, it wasn't the last days when Hebrews was written. The last days is the days that have the nuclear bomb that can burn the earth in an hour. That's the last day. So what he's had there in Hebrews 1 is a prophecy saying in the last days, he's speaking through his Son. How's he do that? You wouldn't know it without the book of Revelations. Yahweh gave, over a 2,000-year period of time, he trained Yeshua for this job. And Yeshua is now opening the seals for us, his house. He speaks to his house. The message, who can declare these things in the last day? Chapter 11, I'll give to my two witnesses. Praise Yahweh. Isaiah 44 says, who can foretell these? Let them, my witnesses, you are my witnesses. You, you're part of this work, each and every one of you. You know, I was reading, no, I wasn't reading it. It just came to my mind last night. I think it was 4 a.m. or something like that, close to it. But Yeshua's words saying, you know, you're looking at a grain of mustard seed that's been planted here and growing into a tree. And I think, you know, when I was born, and under the conditions, we were probably as poor as any family in Oklahoma. But my dad was determined to stay where he was. They were content. And of course, I've told you about my family life, how we would sit at the table reading the scriptures. Each one of us would read the scriptures, and anyone could comment, anyone of the family. But a lot of these things was put in my subconscious mind back then as a child. Half of the time, you know, I can't remember actually getting hungry. I don't think I ever got hungry, but we did without food a lot. We did without food. We ate when we had food, and when we didn't, I can't remember being hungry and even thinking about it. You know, it wasn't something that was on my mind, but I know that we did without food. We never did do without this spiritual food. It was always every night, whether we had or evening, that always came. It was a daily thing. But we did without physical food. Right now, I would rather study and write than I had eat. But that comes with age, they tell me. Okay, here in Revelations now, this is Yeshua, chapter 1 and 1 of Revelations, 1 and verses 1 and 2, shows Yeshua is given this prophecy to open it to us. His house, as is shown in Revelations 22, verse 16. I have given this to all the congregations of the house of Yahweh. Revelation 22:16, I believe. Blessed are those that keep his commandment. That's the message. Blessed are those that keep his commandment. The Pope says he wants to change the commandments again. And he wants to take out the ones that forbid adultery, idolatry, sodomy. He actually says that in this article. I'll read it to you one of these days, maybe. Again, he's already started on it. That is, he hasn't. He hasn't, but he's taken the credit for it. That's like I do. The elders here, they work their hearts out, and I get the credit. That's right. The women work their hearts out, and I get the credit for you, sir, for all this great food y'all are eating. Not exactly, but almost. Well, anyway, in chapter 6, but you and I are one, see? We're all one. So if I get credit, I'm going to make sure that you get credit in heaven, whether you get it here or not. Praise Yahweh. Well, here, chapter 6, now in verse 1, and I saw when he had opened when the Lamb opened, I saw, okay, the only ones that can see this is shown in Revelations 11. I will give to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy these things, including the seals that are taking place in this time period. Isaiah 44, let them foretell them. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, one of the 4 living creatures, that's the horns of the great golden altar, the quartet, the great quartet that Daniel saw but didn't develop until our time period. The time of the nuclear bomb, when the world can really get into a gob of trouble. Four ruling nations that developed from the great army that called the 4th beast. These 4 are still led by the Roman Catholic Church. Yada. He still holds the scepter. Remember? The law-giving scepter. And he changes the law every time the wind changes directions. And they add more laws and delete laws. And I looked, and behold, remember that Daniel 7, he said he was amazed at the amount of laws that this beast passed, the 4th beast. Well, back to Revelation 6:2, and I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat upon it had a bow, and a crown was upon him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. That's the history of this whole thing, from Daniel on, and before Daniel even. The Roman army was being formed in Rome and in Babylon. The Apostle Shaul is proof of that. He had never been to Rome, but he was a Roman soldier. He got his orders from the quartet. Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, who took on a mouth, as Daniel said, a spokesman for them. He went forth conquering and to conquer, riding, notice, a white horse, which white, of course, the white stone. He's trying to imitate that white stone, which is you, brethren. The perfect stone, as was brought out this morning. I think you got to it, right? Okay. I didn't get to listen to all of it, but I knew you had it on your schedule. And when he had opened the 2nd seal, verse 3, I heard the 2nd creature say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was granted to him who sat upon it to take peace from the earth. Take peace from the earth. Well, This is when you saw the great moves, starting with 911, and then here is where you see these four horns being developed here again to do what I'm going to show you that they are going to do. Some of it has already come to pass, but the most of it hasn't yet. The biggest shockers are very soon now to come. They're going to come with this 3.5 years, the missing 3.5 years that Trump is determined to put back into action, and says this plan is going to reverberate throughout the world. Yeah, and heaven too. I'll agree with him there. And to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. They're dying like flies right now, and that's going to catch up with them. And Matthew 24:7 is going to be fulfilled there. Sickness and disease. Big time. Kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword, or great army. Now, this is taking place, as Revelations 9:14 shows, around the great river Euphrates. If you'll hold your place right there and look at chapter 9, just one page there, in verse 14, saying to the sixth Moloch, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels, which we did, who are bound in the great river Euphrates. All of this is going on right around the great river Euphrates right now, just as foretold right here. And the plagues you see in verse 20, the demon worship, the God worship, as you see there, and they won't repent. The Catholic Church and none of the 4,000, almost 5,000 religions will not repent. Now back to chapter 6. 6 and verse 8. If you look at verse 8 there, it shows you that fourth part of the earth. Chapter 9 shows you it's around the great river Euphrates, so it narrows it down and tells you where's the war is going to be. All these wars are taking place in that fourth part of the earth. They won't stay there. America will get hit last. And hard. Really hard. That's what the prophecy shows. That's what's going to take place. In verse 8 says, And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him that sat upon it was Death, and Sheol, the grave, followed with him, and power was given unto him over that fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with pestilence. Now that's without the nuclear burning right there, if you notice. The nuclear wars take place after that. With hunger, pestilence, the same is under the authority of the beast. The beast. That's what Trump is saying now. Give the beast more money for the NATO, the beast's army. The authority is cut for the authority for the moves that these nations, the quartet, is making right now. Now, Malachi Martin said, if you remember, he talked about this, the keys of this blood, and how they're maneuvering to take over, hoping that they will come out on top, he said. The Catholic Church hopes they'll come out on top. But he says, we could have some obstacles here in Russia, a great obstacle in China. He named those two. He named some others besides that would probably be their allies. And that's exactly what's taking place. So you can see they're studying these nations. They're studying the leaders of the nations. They're trying to get rid of certain leaders and replace them with others. It's not an easy thing, the way the world is situated. But one of the things you can look for is Damascus. And I would say to the leader there, I'd say get out while you can, because Damascus is going to be a heap of ruins here very, very soon. Damascus. Okay, back to Revelation 6 now. Let me see where I want to go. 6:1. Hebrews 1:2. That's the last day showing, and then Revelation 6. We covered that. Let me see here where we want to go from here. We're in chapter 4, verse 8. Now look to Revelations 9. We covered that. Revelations, the great river Euphrates, 9:13 through 15. Now, what's next? Look at verse 12. 6 and verse 12. Revelation 6 and verse 12. And I looked, and when he had opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. Well, if you'll turn over to Matithia now, because this ties it, Yeshua ties this all together. He did it. He did this now, get this. He did this when he was on earth. He brought this information to us and had his disciples write it down. Isn't it amazing how we think of these books, Matithia, Mark, Luke, Yochanan, and the works that they did, and how they did it so precisely. You think about that? They had to be trained in note-keeping, brethren, to do this. You see that? They couldn't have done this by memory. You know, after Yeshua died, they went and wrote the books. No way. They were doing this day by day, working with Yeshua, with what he said, what he did. All of these things were being written precisely for us. They had to be written accurately for us today. Well, Yeshua now, here in Matithia 24, he shows the generation in verse 33 and 34. That generation, he says, you're going to see all these things that he shows here in Matithia 24. Verses 33 and 34 says you're going to see all these things take place right now in this generation. So he limits it to a generation, just like Revelation 6 here. This wasn't written for any time in prophecy besides this generation right here. There was no power on earth that could darken the sun until this generation. The power that can darken the sun is the nuclear bombs. Scientists know this. I bring it out in newsletters all the time. It can darken the sun, and they know that if this takes place, or when this takes place, they know that the earth will freeze over quickly, and all life will disappear. Now, Yahweh has already set it up to protect his house. And he says, Yahweh will protect his people. His people. Right. Who are his people? Yeshua answered that question when they said, your mother would like to have a word with you. He answered that question thoroughly. You better get that in your mind. I've harped on it before, you better make it a living thing if you want to live. Yahweh will protect his people. If Daniel, Yashub, all the righteous saints spoken of in the scriptures, if they were here in this generation, they would be protected. Yeshua said that. But if you're not like them and have your mind on this work, That's what the top notch in your mind should be, is study. Go back and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse until it becomes a part of you. So you can sit here and quote scripture to me. Teach me. Well, in Matthew 24 now, Yeshua shows all of this is going to take place. Then in verse 3, he calls it the end. This is going to be the end. When will the end be? Then in verse 7, you see the nation against nation. You just saw when right here, around the great river you showed it for Euphrates is the where. The when is in the days of the great nuclear wars, as Revelation shows there, that can darken the sun. In our time period only. The bomb started in 1934. That was the start of it, with the increase in knowledge that also started in 1934. That's when Yahweh's Witness started. I was born in 1934 and carefully brought up, very, very poor, the smallest of seed. And it's grown now into what we have right here, which is going to grow and take over the whole universe. Yes, you are. You're going to be first if you make it. And you're the one that determines that. The nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That's what he is talking about here in Revelation 6. Take peace from the earth. In and around the great river Euphrates is where it started. In that fourth part of the earth. Kingdom against kingdom. I'm back in Matthew 24, verse 7. And there will be famines and pestilence. That's disease epidemics. You're going to see it big time now. And earthquakes in various places. The earthquake was named here. It's going to come, of course, with the first strikes of the nuclear bombs. It's all together, put all together there for you. The earthquake, the great earthquake, and the use of the great nuclear bombs. Verse 11 shows you why this is taking place. It's false prophets like the Roman Catholic Church, like Yada, who is determined to change the laws of Yahweh, reject the laws, Isaiah 24, because of this. In Daniel 7, they changed the laws. That's exactly what the Pope is wanting to do again. Pope Francis. God, yes, he's got that right. Satan, the chief god Satan, has instructed me to revise the Ten Commandments. Instructed me to revise the Ten Commandments. That's the headlines right there. And to take out now the fourth commandment. This is not really the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment is keep holy the Sabbath day. But they've already changed that in their commandments. I don't know if you've seen their commandments, but they're not like in the book of Yahweh. They changed them, made two of one, took one out already. The fourth commandment, he says here, which advocates that proper respect be shown towards one's parents, has been reworded in order to include children raised by sodomites, or they call it something else there. Pope Francis said the seventh commandment, these people could repent. Yahweh offers repentance. They can change. They can change. Your bodies can change. Yahweh can change your body. I'm talking to the whole world right now when I tell you this. You don't have to remain a sodomite and burn in hell. You don't have to remain with these sins in your body. You can repent and be converted, and Yahweh will change your body. Yeshua talked about this very thing. He talked about it. Do it. Repent. Be converted. Start living, practicing the laws of Yahweh, and you will live. Changing the commandments won't help you. That'll make things worse. read the last 4 verses of Revelations 22, and you'll see there's a curse on the one that changes the laws and the ones that follow those people who change the laws. They're out of the Pope's control. He can't control salvation. He doesn't even have anything to do with salvation. He is 666. He is not 1074. Praise Yahweh. Okay, in Matthew 24, verse 11, many false prophets, yes, almost 5,000 religions, all of them worshiping gods, evil like the gods, as Genesis 3:5 shows. Nobody ever sees that except the House of Yahweh. They read over it and over it and over it and then go and follow the gods. Yahweh says the gods are evil. Yahweh is not evil. He's totally righteous. The tree of life cannot bring forth evil. The tree of evil, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, they cannot bring forth righteousness. They can't. It's impossible for them to do so. Well, where do you go to for righteousness then? Seek first the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness, Yeshua said, Matthew 6:33. Seek it first. Go there and find joy, everlasting joy. Well, here in Matthew now, in this generation, false prophets, many false prophets, will arise and will deceive the many. Yes, Revelations 12:9 says the whole world is deceived by Satan. The serpent, the word Vatican, if you look it up, if you just Google it, just Google the word Vatican, you'll see it means serpent, divining serpent. That's what Cain was, the divining serpent that deceived his mother Eve. He was a priest, and he killed his competition. They rejected Yahweh's law. Yahweh said, let it be cut off. It was cut off. Abel was killed. But he said, in the last days. But in the last days. Yes, the tree of life was cut off. It wasn't to exist anymore until the last days. No, the temple was not it. In fact, Acts will tell you that. The prophet, the apostles, you wouldn't know it if it wasn't for the work of the disciples, Yeshua's disciples, the donkeys that he used. And you wouldn't know it today if it wasn't for the donkeys that I use. That's right. The donkeys are doing the work. Praise Yahweh. Laboring night and day. And because iniquity, notice, iniquity is going to abound. Righteousness is not going to abound. Iniquity is going to abound. And because of this, Isaiah 24 says, the earth is going to be burned. Revelations 18 said in 1 hour, and few men live. That few men is shown in Malachi 4. Malachi 4, he says, for those who, the earth is going to burn like an oven, that's verse 1. Malachi 4, verse 2 said, but for those who reverence my name, get the tapes on reverence my name. Reverence, those who reverence Yahweh. I spent, I think, about 6 or 8 sermons on that one thing. Reverencing the name of Yahweh. That he who names the name Yahweh depart from evil. Evil, Genesis 3:5. Evil like the gods. Stop worshiping gods. 12, verse 12, Matthew 24:12. And because iniquity, the breaking of Yahweh's laws will abound, love will grow cold. Yes, and billions of babies will be murdered. Adults and children, too, murdered in war. They're killing millions of babies with their butcher knives in the hospitals. and cutting their bodies up and using their body parts to make all kinds of things. If you see something that says stem cell, I think you should run from it. If they're trying to sell you something with stem cells. But he who endures, now this is not just staying alive. This is enduring in righteousness. David should have covered that. Maybe he did. He who endures until the end keeps the faith, as the apostle said, practices the laws of Yahweh until the end, practices. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together on the Sabbath day, because if you sin willfully, you don't know where that is? Hebrews. Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together on the Sabbath day, because if you sin willfully, after this knowledge of the truth has come, this is the truth, the white stone, the pure stone, the righteous stone, the stone of acquittal. All of those things are covered under one tag number. That's you, brethren, that's covered under that same tag number. The house of Yahweh. But he who endures until the end, that is, in doing what Yahweh says, the same will be saved. If you leave, you're gone. And there's no hope. And the message of this kingdom will be preached in this generation now. He's talking about a certain generation to all the world. They started setting that up. I won't have time to finish this, but they actually started setting that up right here. Can you see that man's picture? I've had that laying on my desk for years. And I saw that this morning, I said, today's the day. Oh boy, 17. Let me read you just a little bit of it, and then we'll quit here. The Civil War is the central event in America's historical consciousness, while the Revolution of 1776, that's 200 years before I quit the police department and started working full-time for Yahweh. 200 years. They created in 1776 to 1783. 83, I believe, was when we were... Is that when we was given our... recognized by this government that Lincoln helped create here in 1776. In America, which is now chief of the nations, has become so in this generation. The chief of the nations. 1776 to 1783 created the United States. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, determined what kind of nation, do you get that? It determined what kind of nation it would be. Well, Yahweh guided that, or we wouldn't be here preaching. This couldn't be done in any other nation that I know of. That's all I got time for, but I'll read the rest of it later. Well, Yeshua, of course, in Matthew 24, he shows the great nuclear bomb, the same one that he opened the seal and showed where they would start fighting. Peace would be taken from the earth in and around the great river Euphrates. That's where it would start. That's where it will start. It will end with a great world burning. The earth is going to be burned, and few men left. That few men left is yet going to be Yahweh's people. You read that in Malachi 4, those who reverence the name Yahweh. If you reverence the name Yahweh, you're going to be here. You're going to be keeping Yahweh's Sabbaths and growing in the Word of Yahweh. Where could you get what I brought today? Where could you get it any other place but here? There is no other 1074. It's right here. You're it. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!